3 years ago, I moved to a small town in North Carolina for a new job. The company I was working for had opened a new office there, and they offered to help cover part of the rent if I moved closer. I didn't really know anyone in the area, so I spent a few days looking online for a place that was cheap enough but still close to the office. Eventually, I found a small house for rent. It was older, but the price was surprisingly low. The listing said the previous tenant had moved out suddenly, and the landlord was looking for someone to take it as soon as possible. I didn't think much about that at the time, since I was moving from a few states away. I wasn't able to visit the house in person before signing the lease, but the photos looked normal enough, so I figured it would be fine for at least a year. My furniture and boxes were delivered first, about 5 days before I actually arrived. The landlord told me he would let the movers inside the house so they could leave everything in the living room. By the time I finally drove into town, it was already late in the evening. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. There were houses nearby, but I didn't see a single person outside. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the house smelled a little stale, like the air hadn't moved in a while. Boxes were stacked everywhere, and most of my furniture was still wrapped in plastic. I walked through the house slowly, trying to get familiar with the layout. The place was a single story. The living room and kitchen were connected near the front, and a long hallway led to 3 bedrooms in the back. It wasn't a bad place, honestly, just a little old. Since it was already getting late, I decided I would unpack everything the next day. For now, I just wanted to set up the bed and get some sleep. After about 30 minutes, I had the mattress on the frame and some blankets laid out. I plugged my phone in beside the bed, turned off the lights, and fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know how long I had been asleep, but at some point during the night, something woke me up. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. I just remember opening my eyes and sitting there in the dark, listening. The house was completely silent. After a few seconds, I started to think maybe it had just been a dream. But right as I was about to lie back down, I heard it again. A soft sound, like something shifting on the floor. It was coming from somewhere out in the hallway. I sat there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises sometimes, but this didn't sound like wood or pipes. It sounded deliberate, slow, like something moving carefully. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I got out of bed and walked toward the bedroom door. The floor felt cold under my feet as I reached for the door handle. The sound stopped completely. That alone made my stomach drop. I opened the door and looked out into the hallway. It was completely dark. The only light came from my bedroom behind me. I reached out and flipped the hallway light switch. Nothing was there, just the empty hallway stretching toward the living room. I walked down slowly, checking the other rooms one by one. Everything looked exactly the way it had earlier. Boxes stacked everywhere, chairs leaning against walls, nothing out of place. Feeling a little embarrassed for scaring myself, I turned the lights off and went back to bed. It took me a while to fall asleep again, though. I kept thinking about how the sound stopped the moment I touched the door. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. But not long after that, a loud thump echoed somewhere in the house. It was strong enough to shake me awake instantly, before I could even sit up. I heard footsteps, fast ones, running down the hallway. My eyes snapped toward the bedroom door, and that's when I realized something was wrong. The door was open. I was absolutely certain I had closed it. For a second, I just sat there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I looked down at the floor beside my bed, and my heart nearly stopped. There were footprints on the wooden floor, fresh ones. They started at the doorway and walked slowly across the room until they stopped right beside my bed, like someone had been standing there, watching me sleep. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway, but whoever had been there was already gone. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut. The house was completely empty, except for the trail of footprints running down the hallway toward the living room. I grabbed my phone and called the police, then locked myself in the bathroom until they arrived. When the officers searched the house, they couldn't find any signs of forced entry. No broken locks, no open windows, nothing. Just the footprints. They told me it was possible someone had been hiding in the house before I arrived, maybe inside a closet or crawl space. That explanation made sense, but something about the whole situation still bothered me. Because the footprints in my bedroom didn't just stop beside the bed. When I looked closer the next morning, I noticed something else right next to where the footprints ended. There was a faint dent in the mattress, like someone had leaned down close to my face. The landlord didn't argue when I told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. In fact, he seemed relieved. He refunded my deposit and let me move out the same week. At the time, I assumed he just didn't want trouble, but sometimes I still think about that night. And the part that bothers me the most isn't the footprints or the footsteps running away. It's the thought that someone was standing beside my bed in the dark for who knows how long, before that loud thump woke me up.
When I was 29, I bought a small house in an older suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of quiet street where most people had lived there for decades. Not much traffic, not much noise, just rows of old houses and a lot of retired neighbors. The house directly across from mine belonged to an elderly man named Harold. At first, he seemed completely normal. He was quiet, polite, and sometimes gave a small wave if we happened to see each other outside. I didn't know much about him, but people on the street said he had lived there for a long time. But after a few weeks, I started noticing something strange. Almost every night when I got home from work, usually around 11 p.m., Harold would be sitting on a wooden chair on his front porch. He wasn't reading. He wasn't drinking anything. He was just sitting there, staring at the street. At first, I figured it was just one of those habits older people have. Maybe he couldn't sleep. But eventually, I noticed something unsettling. Every time I pulled into my driveway, he was already looking straight at me. Not casually, not like someone who just happened to glance over. It felt like he had been waiting for me to arrive. One night I decided to talk to him. I walked over to the small fence between our houses and joked, "Keeping watch over the neighborhood?" He smiled slightly and said, "Just making sure everything stays quiet at night." I laughed it off and went back inside. But a few nights later, something happened that I still think about. Around 3 a.m., my dog suddenly started barking toward the front door. I got up and looked out the window facing the street. There was someone standing in the middle of the road. I couldn't see the person clearly in the darkness, but I could tell they were just standing there, not moving. Then I noticed something else. Across the street, on his porch, Harold was standing there too. He was facing the person in the road. Neither of them moved. They just stood there, staring at each other for several long seconds. Then the person in the street slowly turned and walked away between the houses. Harold went back inside. The next day I asked him about it. He looked confused and said, "I didn't see anyone last night," which seemed strange because I had clearly seen him standing on the porch. Later that week, I mentioned Harold while talking to another neighbor down the street. She looked surprised. "Harold?" she said. Then she frowned slightly before adding, "That's strange." I asked why, and she said something that still gives me chills. "Harold doesn't sit outside at night." I told her I saw him on his porch almost every evening. She shook her head. "That can't be right," she said. Then she lowered her voice a little. "Harold's been completely blind for almost 10 years.
This happened a few years ago, not long after my family moved into a new house. At the time, we had only been living there for about 2 months. It was a normal suburban home, nothing unusual about it. Just me, my parents, and our dog. One day, I decided to check out the attic. The entrance was one of those small ceiling doors you have to push up to open. I didn't have a ladder, so I grabbed a broom and tried to push the attic door open from the floor. The door lifted slightly, but then suddenly stopped. It felt like something on the other side was holding it down. At the time, I figured it was probably just stuck or blocked by a box. So I didn't think much about it and left it alone. A couple of weeks later, I looked at the attic door again and noticed something strange. It was completely closed, like it had never been opened at all. Around that time, I also started noticing some other weird things. Our dog, who was usually very calm, began acting strangely at night. Sometimes he would sit under the kitchen table and stare up at the ceiling. Other times he would whine softly for no clear reason. Then one night I heard something. Footsteps. They were coming from above me. At first I thought maybe it was the house settling or the sound of pipes, but it didn't sound like that. These were slow, heavy steps, like someone walking across the attic. My parents sleep very deeply, so I figured they wouldn't hear anything. I got up and checked around the house, but everything downstairs was completely normal. Still, the sounds kept happening on different nights. Eventually, I decided I needed to check the attic again. This time, I brought a ladder. When I pushed on the attic door, it barely moved. It felt like it had been blocked from the inside. That's when I started getting really uncomfortable. I told my parents what was going on, and we decided to call the police just to be safe. When the officers arrived, they forced the attic door open and climbed up to take a look. They didn't find anyone, but they did find something that made the whole situation even stranger. Up in the attic, hidden between some old boxes, there was a sleeping bag, several empty food containers, and a small pile of trash. It looked like someone had been living up there, but whoever it was gone. The officers couldn't tell us if the items had been left by the previous owners, or if someone had actually been staying there recently. To this day, we still don't know. But after that night, my dad sealed the attic entrance completely. Because the idea that someone could be living inside your house, without you ever knowing, is a lot more terrifying than most people realize.